So you're metaphorically moving out of the garage.
Yes, exactly. We moved that. I think we raised like a small amount of money in 2018, and we realized it didn't solve our problems, and we had to kind of work it out and actually build something people wanted.
Welcome back to another edition of the Business of Betting podcast. I am your host, Jeff Edelstein, senior analyst at InGame. I'm joined today by Zack Panos of 4C. Zack, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Zack, you look a lot younger and a lot smarter than me. So what am I doing wrong? Let's start there.
I don't know. I think you look great. You're like 42, so I think, you're in the prime.
Oh, Zack, you're so kind. You're so freaking kind. I'll accept 42. No joke, though, for real. If you don't want to answer it, feel free. How old are you?
I am 29. So I get it. I look younger, People have said, yeah.
You got a little baby face. Trust me, you'll be very happy as the years tick by. There was, for a long time, people thought I was younger than I was. Then my beard started turning this color, and now it's horrible. It's ugly. All right, Zack, tell me. Let's just go through the arc a little bit. Let's start with the present. Tell me what 4C is. Tell us what 4C is, what 4C is doing, what problem you're trying to fix, and how's it going?
Yeah, so I think in order to understand 4C or 4Casters, you kind of have to go back to 2017. We started as originally a peer-to-peer betting exchange on the blockchain. We did Ethereum. We thought that this technology was going to enable a new type of people to bet peer-to-peer, specifically on the blockchain. What we kind of realized was that a lot of the largest bettors were already betting with each other. This was pre-PAPSA, pre-kind of everything. And so what we did, we said, instead of these large betting groups texting each other in a Telegram group chat, we were going to connect them directly on our software. This was about in 2019, 2020. And that's kind of how 4Casters got started. It was like a private place before all the prediction market stuff for really big movers and kind of shakers in the sports betting industry to trade with each other. And we've kind of just grown organically since then. We have now we're outside the US. We're not really riding the prediction market wave as much. Our kind of thoughts around that are simple. Like, you don't want to be the third or fourth person at the dance for a lot of these things in gaming, and we've kind of accepted this is a big thing that's happening, but we're not necessarily betting the company on it right now. Have a very long-term mindset. I'm still thinking in terms of 5 or 10 years. That's a little bit about 4C. I mean, we're small from a user standpoint betting exchange. We were invite only for a while. 2 people basically ran the whole exchange. About $1 billion has been bet over the last year or so. We're focused outside the US, but we're working on launching a US product. So that's the rundown, I would say.
A couple things. So when you say you're focused outside the US, does that mean it's not open for US people to engage with?
That is correct.
Okay. So are you finding that there are US people who have partners elsewhere that are using this for you, or you don't even, yeah?
I would think about it like this. Anybody who's a really serious bettor wants access and has ways to get access to a number of different platforms, right? Because for, a serious guy, if you're betting 100 million a year, like the difference between minus 108 and, minus 104 is, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I think these people have networks where maybe the guy comes up with the idea that, Philly -7 is, fair price, should be Philly -6.5. And he kind of has partners all over the world. So I definitely think that does happen. Generally speaking, I would say we're focused outside the US.
As you said, you're appealing to the pros, the sharps. Are you finding are your prices generally going to be better than they're going to find elsewhere? Or are you now in a pitched battle with, the 3 dozen prediction markets and the, 100,000 sports books?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So when we started back in 2020, we were really the only exchange, and we started no commission. So our selling point at that time was really around get the best price every time for your bet. I still think that's a big part of it. However, our users care more about liquidity, like a combination of liquidity and price. And I would say generally we have strong liquidity for one, big games, but 2, a regular kind of baseball game. And, when I say strong liquidity, I'm not talking about Kalshi, you can bet, 100 100,000 at like, minus 115. Like we kind of sit in the middle. Like maybe we can bet, 10, 15,000 at like minus 108. So it's kind of like a little bit of, I would say like we're kind of analogous in some ways to like a Pinnacle, where like maybe when the prediction market landscapes of like, a Kalshi or a Polymarket, the amount you can bet, it might not be as much, but the price is generally going to be better. And we get a lot tighter than Pinnacle for big games. That's kind of the big benefit of an exchange, right? You can go on, Sunday Night Football, Packers, Bears, like it's going to be minus 101 plus 100, and basically 1% charge on that. So it rounds out to about like minus 103, like minus 101. So, versus like a traditional sports book could never really offer that price.
Now, you said that you're not like trying to play in the same, swimming pool as the Kalshis and the Polys and all that, but you're at the same club, right? And so like, how has their rise affected your business? Even if you're not looking to compete with them, but I'm sure like there's downstream effects.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a good way to think about our business is we basically organically doubled every year for the past 5 years. So in 2023, we were doing more volume than Polymarket and Kalshi, kind of all organically. The difference is we never set ourselves up for, I would say, like this big moment. Like our kind of strength was doing a lot with a little. And then all of a sudden when the floodgates opened, we were like two guys that like were working really hard and had like, a vision and organic growth, but not people who were prepared to capitalize on like, all these millions of people coming in and this and that. We were kind of always a invite-only kind of closed platform for professional bettors. And as liquidity in the space grows, as I'm sure you can imagine, it helps us a lot, right? Because just the more money there is flowing around, the more need there is for people to hedge their bets, for example, or, to be able to bet more. So it's definitely helped us in a lot of ways. I think that the biggest one is just, more liquidity is good for the ecosystem. We kind of went from big fish and very small pond to small fish and very big pond. And I think we've still benefited from that. Obviously, if you're looking next to you and you're like, well, I mean, they grew 100x and we grew 2x, you're kind of like, well, like maybe, how we thought about it wasn't correct or, whatnot. Like, but I always kind of look back and I'm like, it makes sense we ended up where we did right now versus them. Like Kalshi raised 30 million in 2019, 2020 or whatever. Like we were trying to make $4,000 a month to get out of our parents' house, and you kind of like look at the arc of things and just how we are. And it's like, okay, like you accept where you are, it's cool to have, I think how I've always thought about it is I want to make a great product, right? And I think we have a great product for a small group of people. It's a very niche product right now. And I've always kind of wanted to touch people deeply with the product more so than I want a million people to use the product, right? So, I mean, if you make something that's very vapid that like, you get all these signups for and like people use it and they just kind of take it for granted. They don't really think about it. It's like, yeah, it's just what I have to do and it's not that deep. Like, I think like that's cool. I think the products that we make and kind of what inspires me and kind of what gets me going is when I use something and I'm like, wow, the care in this, like the detail, every little part of it, like I absolutely like love. I can feel like the person who created this, like they really thought about this and it made my life better. And I think that's kind of always been the goal more so than, hey, let's get, 10 million people on it. And quite frankly, we haven't been ready for it. So that's kind of what this next stage is about for us.
Going back to what you said earlier about liquidity and how more liquidity is better. And that obviously that's, that's undoubtable, but there is a limit to like market makers and how much money is in the pool. And, I should say there's a limit. There's no limit really, but there is a theoretical point where there's only so many market makers working at so many different prediction markets and only so much money they have to back themselves. Do you see that becoming an issue? Not necessarily for your business, but in the marketplace in general. Like if there's 40 different prediction markets up and running, all offering the Phillies minus 101, like at some point the money's going to dry out and we're going to see like a little bit of a contraction. Is that something that worries you, or are you like too small to fail compared to some of these other bigger operations?
It worries me on that sense. No, I think that, what we'll see probably is these market makers are going to be given credit. Like Kalshi's kind of already paved the way for that. So, I mean, the cost of capital is just going to go down more and more. And like a lot of these market makers on the Phillies, like are probably buying back at other places as well. So a lot of like like the US winning the World Cup as an example. I don't think, a bunch of like Square wins come and market makers get wiped out. So I think like as long as people have edge in trading, like there's going to be capital to supply that edge. I mean, just the rate of return is just going to be so high. So I'm not worried at all about liquidity drying up in the space. I think like more of the question is if the kind of what happened with Betfair, if the recs stop coming for whatever reason, that's more the concern. I think that the money's kind of unlimited, but you bring up a good point about the odds, and I think ultimately like odds are going to become like this big commodity. Like I don't think having great prices or whatnot for a prediction market is going to be that much of a differentiator. Like for example, like Kalshi right now, they charge very high fees for takers, right? It's like 3.5%. They're kind of what I would think about as a Square prediction market. What I mean by that is they're not trying to get someone to come in and take who really cares about price that much. Right, their proposition to market makers is, look, I'm going to bring in 10 million guys that have no idea what they're doing, and you're going to be able to bet against them, and we're going to take high fees from everyone, but everyone's going to be happy because these people don't care about price, which is actually very good if you're a market maker. A market maker doesn't want someone who's like, yeah, I like the Yankees, but not at that price. Maybe if it moved a cent, I would like them. And so what's going to happen is because Kalshi kind of already won that space is you'll see a race to zero for everyone else, right? Everyone's going to be like, hey, we're going to charge lower and lower fees, and we're going to try to get these two price-sensitive people to bet against each other. And that's going to be not a great business because, any business where people are just using it because it's a low price is just going to be, like a carousel, because you're not going to be able to actually make money if your whole goal is to offer very low prices. And that's kind of something we learned with the whole sweepstakes experiment is like processing fees are expensive. Like, if you're really trying to cut price and, you're charging 1-2%, like that adds up, fraud and whatnot. Like now you're going to charge like 0.25% on that. And it's like, well, you have no other real ways to make money, right? Sweepstakes kind of worked for some people. Like I'll use Novig as an example because they could book the parlays and trade their markets and know their counterparties. But when you go to CFTC regulated environment, you can't really do that as much. It's like a little bit of a different game. So I think it's going to be tough space to carve something new out right now. And so that's kind of our perspective on it.
So, I keep drifting from what I want to ask, but now I'm going to ask you this also. My drift will continue. I think you have a pretty interesting viewpoint from where you sit, right? Where you're not attacking the U.S. market. You are running, an exchange. You know the ins and outs of this as well as anybody. And he mentioned like if rec bettors start drying up. And I kind of think that rec bettors are going to dry up because I still think that the sportsbook experience is a cleaner, more intuitive experience for most recreational bettors. I'm going to put myself in that bucket to the point where I almost think we wouldn't even be having this conversation if America was like every other country in the world and made their rules countrywide instead of statewide. Take California and Texas out of the mix. Do prediction markets, are we even like sitting here today? Like, does it become like this big deal? I don't know what my question is, and I don't know if there's an answer to that non-question, but I think it's something worth thinking about for like, especially like the Kalshi, because it just takes one lousy experience and I'm the rec better running right back to the sports book.
Yeah, and I think like there's a key thing to understand here, which is that in California and Texas, there's no legal sports betting. So effectively what you have is Kalshi's the sports book, they're the marketing engine, and they're basically licensing out the people who actually take the risk, right? And so they're kind of creating this makeshift sports book. You can see it in their margins and everything that they're doing. Like they're effectively just a new model for a sports book. Now, to that point, like if FanDuel and DraftKings were already in California and Texas, I kind of agree with you. Like the wave right now, and this is kind of where I think they're losing the narrative battle, the prediction markets are, is the wave right now is, hey, legally bet sports in places where there's not sports betting, right? And that's never what I felt like prediction markets were about. The core problem in sports betting is getting banned and limited, right? Everybody can get behind that is wrong. You can't have FanDuel, DraftKings saying you can win all this money, it's all great. But if you beat them, then they're going to shut you off. And if you're addicted to gambling, like they'll say like, keep betting. Like, this is great. Let me text you. How you doing? How was your week? You want to make another bet, right? And that's the core problem in the industry right now. it's kind of getting lost in the plot right now, where when you pour so much money into this, like from VC money and the valuations, they just have to kind of keep growing at all costs. But I think most people at this point are kind of against prediction markets because it's kind of like disingenuous, like the marketing behind it. And it's become very politicized, which I'm concerned about in 28. I think the Democrats will probably win, just kind of the nature of the flip-flop and kind of how the current administration is doing. And I think them aligning so closely with Trump will probably come back to bite them in some way. And I also think like this loophole that existed, like when you look at who's on the Supreme Court, it's mostly conservative justices. And that's important because they're very much like, what was the intent of the law? Did they really intend to legalize sports betting? Like with the wording they used? And like, pretty clearly they didn't. They would be like, hey, we're legalizing sports betting at the federal level. They would just come out and say that. They wouldn't be like super like cryptic about it. So I think when you combine all these things, like it's probably not going to be around in its current form in like, a few years. And like, that's kind of why I think Kalshi probably just keeps riding this wave. Maybe Polymarket can make some moves. Like maybe you'll see like a very low commission exchange, like get, a little motion behind them. But I think ultimately, like, if something is going to come to an end and you're not going to be able to make big margins on it, like, it's kind of like not the best spot to kind of jump in and say like, oh, look, we're here too. Like, hi, like, try us out. We're the same as everybody else. But I think your point about California and Texas is definitely valid. And I agree with you. I think Sportsbook is a better product right now for these recreational people.
Yeah, it definitely is. Let's go to your business. You've said a few times like that you've been looking toward the future for your company. What is the future? Like, what do you see? Where's your role in all this? Hopefully 5-10 years down the road.
Yeah, I want to create a great product. Like, I think fundamentally there's no reason why a prediction market can't deliver the same exact experience that a sportsbook can. Like I said, I mean, the reason why FanDuel and DraftKings are better experiences is not anything to do with a limitation of a prediction market, right? Like you could wrap a prediction market and in the FanDuel app and have it work exactly the same. So I think like ultimately we will see these two things converge. And I do think eventually we'll have national legalized sports betting. I think like it ultimately should be treated like a, a financial contract, because there's a fundamental difference between spinning a roulette wheel and predicting who's going to win a game. You never really know what the odds are in Phillies Pirates. You can say the market came to a price and this and that, but you never actually know. The Phillies might actually win 75% when they were 66%. And I think that's like an important distinction to make in kind of like the whole prediction market landscape. And I think it should be regulated differently. I'm just kind of, I guess, thinking on a longer time horizon. But overall, I think like what's next for us is we want to start the next wave. Like I do think prediction markets will be kind of short to medium term. And I'm kind of thinking like, okay, like when this ends, you're going to have all these people who want this style experience who are not going to be able to get it from a prediction market. Where does that lead? And I think like Kalshi was a great example. Kalshi kind of sat around for years, right? Working on this one thing. They had no real volume, nothing really going for, a long time. But they were just laser focused. They were like, what we need to do is this. This is like going to be our moment. And kudos to them. Like they got it. And I think like that's been they had the legal thing all figured out. They had everything figured out. And I think that's kind of a model for us to kind of emulate. And I think another one is like thinking bigger. I think we were two people for most of the company. And that works out great when you're trying to make money, like just like a little bit, make $1 million a year as a company, like that's awesome. But once you want to make something that millions of people use, like that process of building up a team and whatnot, like you kind of have to build a foundation for that in years in advance. And I think we're transitioning as a company and kind of thinking about that as the next step.
So you're metaphorically moving out of the garage.
Yes, exactly. We'll move that. I think like we raised like a small amount of money in 2018 and we realized it didn't solve our problems, and we got people very excited and kind of let them down. We're talking about like $100,000. We're not like, nothing crazy, but I think like that kind of made us a little gun shy to go out and raise more money. And I think we kind of realized that money wasn't going to solve this problem, and we had to kind of work it out and actually build something people wanted.
I want to rewind. So you said at the very top of our conversation that you started this around 2017. You used terms like peer-to-peer and blockchain and Ethereum and exchange. And I want to say, what the fuck, dude? Where did this come from? You're like a 20-year-old kid. These are things that people in the mainstream and even like on the fringes are not necessarily familiar with the genesis of all this. What made you decide to jump into this? What's your background before this as a kid? Like, it just seems like a huge leap to make today when people already know what we're talking about. But forget about 10 years ago when nobody knew what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think a few shaping kind of key experiences. I was big into online poker when I was like 8 or 9. So my dad was a trader on the CBOE floor. And so he kind of always understood the importance of knowing how to take risk and kind of think about money management. And he thought poker was kind of a good game for that. And, I do the free rolls on Poker Stars, and I kind of built up like a little bit of a bankroll. And I had a lot of fun in that like poker era. And then kind of that evolved to like, my dad would be like, who do you like on this game? You like the Bucks, you like the Celtics. And I think like that was something that I just kind of grew up in and I felt like I was naturally good at. And I think it teaches you at a young age, like actually some pretty important lessons, like different lessons than you get, again, if you were spinning a roulette wheel with your dad and like, you think it's going to land on 7, son? Like, all right, So I think it taught me, like, it kind of shaped my worldview on things. And I worked on the CBOE floor as a high school student. And I noticed everybody on the floor in Chicago, like the open outcry floor, like, paper buys, XYZ, they would always be trading sports like all day. They were like, hey, what's the market on the Bulls to win the East? What's the, and they just quote it same way prediction markets do. They'd be like, oh, I'll buy 60s, and I kind of saw that people just loved trading, like with each other, like these things. Like it was the same as trading a financial product to them, except more fun and relevant, right? So instead of, trading oil, they're trading the Chicago Bulls.
And they're trading just amongst themselves?
Because they're just kind of bored, they're like, or like, what's the price on the Yankees today? And they would always be futures, but they'd always be kind of, and that kind of clicked to me in that moment. And then an app came out actually in like 2016 called Bait. This is like a real deep cut. They were peer-to-peer and you would settle with a Venmo. And I remember like the clerk I was working under at the time, he's like, this peer-to-peer thing is going to be the future, dude. Like this is definitely where it's going. Like this is, I think it might've been 2014 actually. And like, it just kind of clicked for me. Like I was like, oh, like peer-to-peer is, why would there be these intermediaries? It doesn't really make sense. Like it's kind of like a legacy thing. It's kind of like, and at that time Uber's hot. I mean, it's the same story as Uber. It's like, instead of like the taxis, what if you just let, anybody be FanDuel? Why is there just one person allowed to set prices? I mean, really all a prediction market, or I hate the word prediction market, all like these peer-to-peer markets is instead of saying one person sets the price, everybody takes it, you say anybody can set the price. And like, that's the only difference. Like which obviously is going to be better for everybody involved, except for the one person that can set the price. And maybe taxes, that's whole nother angle, but yeah.
All right, I'm hitting the rewind button again. So dad teaches you the art of managing risk instead of the art of gambling. Is that a fair way to put it?
I think thinking probabilistically. Because I think poker, a lot of it is like, okay, like you're going to hit the flush X% of the time. What happens if you hit the flush? What happens if you don't hit the flush? I think it's that. And I think it's, money management, I think, are two huge things in gambling.
All right. So a couple of things I want to tackle here. And for longtime listeners of the pod, these are things I've tackled before and I just can't shut up. I've gambled on and off my whole life, placing a bet here, a bet there with friends. And when I was in high school to, whatever, not go to the track, but never anything serious. I didn't get really serious about it until I started playing DFS in like 2014. Not for serious money, but for in my headspace, I was serious with it. And it changed the way I think. It's just, there's no other way to say it, but it changed the way I think. And now I think probabilistically, right? I used to think, when I would find, a decision point in my life and I'd agonize until I was 100% one side or the other. Now, once I hit 50.1%, my decision is made, because like everything else is just noise. So I feel like if, big if, capital letters, quotation marks, asterisks, if exchange betting, prediction markets, Kalshi, if all this stuff becomes, which it may, becomes part of like the day-to-day existence for everybody, you see the tickers on CNN and Fox, if this becomes part of the fabric, Does this change the way humanity thinks about life? Like, it's like a legitimate, like, is all this stuff, by bringing all this stuff above board and making it part of the daily existence of everybody, is it going to have a similar effect? Is it going to change the way people like consume and think about their decision making? I'll start there. Big question.
100%. And I go back to like the most basic example, which is you take a college kid and he's from Carolina and he thinks the Panthers are going to win. And he bets into a sports book, let's just say. And he loses money or he makes money, but over time he's going to lose money. And everybody's taught to be so confident in their decisions, but when they interact in these markets, they kind of realize how little they know, right? Then they go like Vegas knows or, whatnot. But I think it is like a useful activity for people to kind of experience like the fact that they don't know that much versus everybody. I think like there's something like humbling and kind of empathetic about that is pretty useful for people to experience. And I think with the news and prediction markets, I think that's like probably the coolest case for prediction markets, like in the medium term, is like the media side. Because the core problem, which, I think a lot of people agree with, is, a talking head can say something like, markets put real world events and quantify them in a way that you can't with words. And, if something happens and they just say, oh, the odds of war in Iran shot up from 20 to 33%, like, that's very tangible. And that's something like my mom would use, like at some level. Like if she got an Apple alert, like war probability jumps 10%, she'd be like, that would make sense to her at some level. And I think prediction markets and news do go hand in hand. The tricky thing is that's not the moneymaker. Kelsey's not going to build a $50 billion business off that, right? So they have to be booking parlays from 19-year-olds, and that's how they have to make their money. But I think like that is, and that's why the prediction market story, I think, and why they're able to raise on this big evaluation, is the narrative is actually very strong how this could reshape the fabric of society well beyond sports. You can't have your cake and eat it too right now, and like where they're making money is not that. And I think another big problem is those markets that would move on news and that type of stuff is there's not that much liquidity or interest to trade them. They're mostly like marketing fluff when you get down to the real kind of root of it. Like at least today, like nobody's trading these things unless something happens. But to that point, like the bar that has to be crossed to improve news is pretty low. And so I do think like just that I think it will change how we think about things. And I think that's a good thing.
Along those same lines, let's shout out your high school. What high school did you go to?
Hinsdale Central.
Did they have a sex ed program there at your high school?
I do recall that, yes.
Did they have a alcohol and drug awareness portion of the program there? They sure did. During driver's ed, they told you that you should probably not drive 100 miles an hour too, right? Tell me all about your gambling education.
Nope, it's basically you lose until it hurts so much that you're like, dang, I can't do this again.
I really think, and I was, my kids, my oldest is 17, I think we're wandering into this gamification of everything, and we're not giving this generation, right, a step behind you, the tools on how to deal with it. Not all of their dads sat them down in front of, a computer and taught them poker at age 8 and to think probabilistically. Do you feel like that there is, are we like rushing headlong into creating a generation of, and I hate using the term, degenerates?
I think we're entering this age of leisure. And for better or worse, like with AI and all these things, like people are looking for ways to be entertained. And there is something to be said that there is potentially some societal benefit to knowing what everybody thinks about things. Right, where you could scrape like Twitter sentiments and see what people are saying on Twitter. But prediction markets are cool in that you can really kind of see, here's what if you took everybody's opinion and combined it, like this is what the odds are for an event. And I do think that there is something to be said about that having some value or some usefulness. But yeah, I think we're entering this casinofication of everything phase for better or worse. And I think it's probably related to AI as well. Like, that goes to like a small team like us. It's been incredible. Like we can do 10, 100 times more. We don't need to hire a team of 50 people. Like we need one guy who's really good at something and give him AI and like let him cook, and I think that you're kind of seeing the side effects of that and this kind of push for gambling is the only way to make it. Like there's not like this notion of you go to school and you make, 100K a year. Like that's really not tenable for like right now 90% of people. I'd bet 95 maybe. And so it's kind of like, well, I have to do this job I don't like for a low amount of money. Like, how can I get out of this? It's like, well, gambling. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like I said, we kind of focus on professionals, and that's kind of who we've always catered to. So I have less qualms about this notion of like the 22-year-old kid who hates his life, who just wants to, have bet too much money on Michigan to win a basketball game. But I think your point about this education of, gambling addiction is very real, because gambling addiction, you can lose everything in one night. Like, it's really horrible. And I think that it needs to be a way, way bigger thing talked about.
Like just talking this through, it almost seems like, the big winner in the gambling space overall is going to be the person that comes up with the low cost, something that costs a little, keeps you engaged for a long time with the potential to win huge, but where it's almost impossible to get too deep over your head. And I'm saying that in regards to the one thing you said about AI, which is a great point, right? Whatever your job is today, if your job involves a computer monitor, AI can make you either unneeded, or it's going to cut the amount of hours that you need to actually do what you need to do. And so it's so easy to like pick up your phone and log on and, start gambling, especially as everything has become a gamble, right? I'm old enough to remember when you would buy baseball cards because you like baseball players. Now it's, everything becomes a gamble.
It's a scratch off ticket for kids. That's what it is.
And adults. I mean, some of these boxes sell for $25,000. I mean, it's out of control. But yeah, I mean, everything is becoming, kind of gamblified. And yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before, but you're right. It's like the attention economy. Now I'm old enough to remember what it was like to be bored, and you had to just like live in it, right? I had 5 channels on the television, no computer, no video game, you go outside and you throw a ball against the house. We've covered a lot of ground here. What haven't I asked you that you might want to discuss? What ideas do you have that are percolating in that young mind of yours that I'd like to crack open?
No, I think I enjoyed our conversation. I think the main takeaway that I get is like the main thing I feel like is I want people to believe that a sports book and prediction market can offer the exact same experience. And I think what you said is very resonating with me, which is like, I think these platforms, because of shareholders and wanting to grow super fast, are very fixated on how much money can they make today. And for me, I think everybody should have a set amount that they're willing or able to lose, like internally, where it's like, I have $100 I can realistically feel comfortable losing a month on this, right? And the goal should not be to make them lose more than that, make them do anything more. Like, if they lose $1 a day, like as a platform, like that's great. Like, I'm making $1. Like, imagine a subscription that you did on your phone where you paid $30 a month. Like, that's a huge subscription. And I would really like to see the industry, and kind of this is something I'm passionate about if we get to the mainstream, is like, hey, like if I can get some guy to use my app for 20 minutes a day and they lose less money, which I think is ultimately the selling point, like that's probably better for me. Like, I'd rather someone be super engaged with my product for years and use it in a way that's not crazy. Maybe they're not going to lose $700 in one night, but like they use it and they enjoy it. They think it's a cool product and they like the brand. And that's what I think ultimately, like this whole, it's all going to become a commodity. It's all just going to come down to brand. That's where sports, all this stuff, like pricing, like you said, the same market makers, then quote the same prices on everywhere. And it's just going to come down to like, what feel do you like? What narrative do you like? What story you like? And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is I want to make something that like when people use it, they think it's great. And whether, 2 million people use it or, 500 people use it, I want to build a great product. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, it reminds me that this entire ecosystem is not customer friendly, right? It just simply is not. And, I look at like a company like Disney that puts all their eggs in the customer service basket, and makes, the whole point is to make sure that everyone is happy. There's probably space for that in this industry, right? The company that like, we are going to make you happy no matter what, right? And if that means that instead of making, $1 billion this quarter, we're going to make 800 million, so be it, right? But there's definitely room for that. Zach, we're going to do this again because I have a feeling your name is going to be in this business for a long time. Zach, I really appreciate you joining us today. Go watch a baseball game at Wrigley. We're recording this on the day the wind's blowing out. You might catch a home run ball. All right, Zack Panos, thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff. It was a pleasure. Cheers.